Hey everyone! You know, what's the point of having an RV if you have to stay connected to a pole and to a hose all the time? A big part of having an RV is being able to be self-sufficient and being able to boondock. So what is boondocking, you might ask? Well, let's talk about it right now. Hey, I won't ask you to like this video. I won't ask you to click the bell for notifications, but I will ask you to subscribe. I do all of this on my own, and the one thing that really helps me out is if you can click subscribe, which tells YouTube you're interested, and that helps my stats. So please, subscribe. Thank you. So boondocking is also known as dry camping. It refers to camping without using hookups for water, electricity, or sewer. Most RVs are self-contained. For a certain amount of days, they can provide their own electricity, they can provide their own water, and they can contain their own sewage and waste. It's not uncommon for boondockers to also have some sort of generator. I have a Honda Ultra Quiet EU inverter style generator. That is very undisruptive. It's very, very quiet. You can hold a conversation standing right next to it. Other people roll out some really large, loud contractor generators that sound like you got a construction site going on in the middle of the forest. I'll be doing a series on boondocking over the next year, and whenever I find or know about some really good boondocking spots, I'm going to go ahead and document them and put up a short little video. So when you're boondocking or dry camping, it's really important that you keep all your waste on board until you can find a proper place to dump that waste, both the liquid waste and the trash waste. Where does that name come from? Turns out boondocks comes from the Philippines, where I guess it first came back after the Philippine-American War, and then it further got adopted in World War II. But it's basically a Tagalog word from the Philippines, and it means something to the effect of mountain. And even in the Philippines, it refers colloquially to the people out or the area out in the remote areas, less city-like. And then that word has just been adopted through the American vernacular, and then it was recycled back through Vietnam War as the boonies. And this term has just lived on in the American vernacular. Again, this is dry camping without any hookups, and you're completely standalone and self-sufficient within your rig. This is often very similar to, or often executed as, dispersed camping. And this is where you camp on a public land, usually in a remote or undeveloped area. And dispersed camping is free usually, and it allows you to camp anywhere on public land as long as you follow this whole leave no trace idea. Everything you bring in, you pack back out, and a lot of times there will be specific instructions to stay more than 100 feet away from water sources. Now the terms are a little different in the States versus Canada. Down in the States, you've got the BLM land, or the Bureau of Land Management. This is a real traditional way of boondocking. The BLM authority often has some pretty loose rules where you can stay on any land for 14 days without having to pay or get a permit. Sometimes they'll have a permit process, but it'll still be free. And then there's some areas where they charge a very small fee, but you get access to trash, a sanitary dump, and often bathrooms and water. Most of these areas are located in the western United States, and you can find those by looking at the BLM website. Similar to BLM, you've got the National Forest. This is managed by the U.S. Forest Service. It's often, again, in remote and undeveloped areas. A lot of it is out west. And again, there are certain specific rules, so you want to contact or look at the U.S. Forest website. But there are a wealth of opportunities for you to just park wherever you want and just boondock. In Canada, we don't have the BLM or National Forest Service, but we do have Crown land. That's generally land owned by the government or not owned by anybody. Each province handles it a little bit differently, but very similar to the States. Out here in the West and up in the Northern Territories, it's a little more relaxed, and the rules are in place so that you can drive down a Forest Service road and generally park where you want in a wide swath of all these provinces. And as long as you follow the rules and stay within the time limits, don't leave any trace, you can generally camp in Crown land all over the place, with certain localized exceptions, usually because of either being near nature that's been identified as being sensitive, or if you're near a town. A lot of times the rules change the closer you get to an actual town in Canada. Now, whether you're in Canada or the United States, National park boondocking, it does happen, meaning there will sometimes be designated RV spaces that are dry camping, where you have to bring everything. They don't have any water or electric or anything like that. But for the most part, you can't just boondock in the historic traditional way in national parks, meaning you just find yourself a plot of land and sit there for a few days or a week. National parks are usually very restrictive into how you can camp and where you can camp. So it's important with whatever national park you're going to that you check to see what the rules are and what the options are. In Canada, most national parks, you're generally going to find some pretty tight restrictions. This also extends itself to state parks and provincial parks, which have varying degrees of rules. So you always want to look to the park rules specifically to where you're going. Now there's private property boondocking. This is where you camp on private land with the permission of the landowner, whether you own it or it could be somebody's farmland or a ranch. It could be somebody's backyard or their driveway. It's always important that you get permission before you boondock on private property. Property rights are everything, and the reality is you can't just put your RV on somebody else's property and just start squatting there. That's called squatting, not boondocking. It's also important that just because your acquaintance or somebody you know has given you permission to stay there doesn't mean that the local regulations or the HOA rules, if you're in a housing association or a strata, a lot of times there are rules that prevent people from boondocking or parking their RVs to stay in it. Most cities have laws saying you can't stay in your RV if you're just parked somewhere, and a lot of cities have laws about actually living in the RV or staying in the RV at all while it's on private property. So again, look to the local rules and regulations. Don't just assume that just because your friend said you can stay in their driveway means that you can stay in their driveway. Let's talk about urban boondocking. This refers to camping in a city or a suburban area, again, without any hookups or water or anything like that. And it's important to note that urban boondocking is not often allowed. In most cities and towns, you can't actually stay in your RV legally on the street or parked on the street or parked in a parking lot of a business unless that business is an RV camp place. Now there's a lot of gray area here. I point that out a lot in my videos, that this is where being discreet, having a nice, tidy, newer camper that's clean and nice. You follow the general rules of boondocking, and you can get away with urban boondocking more. This is often also called stealth camping or stealth van life, where people make their vans and trucks sort of look like regular commercial vehicles. So when they park in commercial areas, they're generally not identified or concerned with. Usually the problem will be that somebody complains. Somebody points out to the police, hey, there's a guy living in the van over there, and then you get the knock. Nobody ever wants to get the knock. The knock is when the police or the park ranger or somebody's knocking on your door telling you, you got to move your rig, you can't stay here. This happens a lot in urban boondocking. I mean, if you really look at van life and all that, sometimes there's a real fine line between being homeless in your van and living the van life or the RV life. It's a continuum, and the tidier you keep your environment, the more you don't camp outside of your van with chairs or things out on the street or the sidewalk, the more likely that you're going to be able to get away with urban camping or really boondocking anywhere. Those general rules apply. Make a very, very modest, very humble footprint wherever you park. You want to make sure you leave no trace. You want to leave your slide outs and awnings in as much as possible. I know with some rigs you've got to pull the slide out just to use it, but you want to do everything you can, the minimum impact as possible. You want to look around and make sure you're not right in front of somebody's house. So again, complaints are what's going to drive this. Whether you're urban boondocking or you're boondocking out on a country road, you always want to follow these general principles of being very humble, having a very small footprint, and again, the nicer your rig, the more you look like a tourist traveler, and the less you look like some homeless person living in their bus making meth, the less you're going to get a knock, or at least if you look a little shady, or you look like you're being disrespectful to the place that you're stopped at, or if you're staying there for more than maybe 8 to 12 hours, you run the risk of a proactive contact from a law enforcement official or some sort of authority that's telling you you can't stay here. There are some safer options for urban boondocking. There are parking lots, Walmarts, less and less because of regulations and abuse. There are Walmarts that allow you to stay overnight. At least the Walmart rules do. The city rules may not. And so sometimes there's signs outside of Walmart because the city demands that they enforce the no parking rule. Sometimes it's because Walmart itself has found that it's a problem and they need to stop the overnight parking. Home Depots, other types of big box stores. Often if you park in the back, you park at the end of the night, and you take off in the morning, you have a very low footprint, you can get away with it. It's not going to cause a problem. Casinos are another one that you can stop at for urban boondocking. Casinos usually, just like those big box stores, expect you're going to come in and spend some money if you're going to be parking there overnight. That's another thing to keep in mind with all of these parking lots and casinos, is if you are staying there, it's generally a good etiquette to go spend some money. Go inside and buy something. Just go buy some dessert or spend a little money doing something so that you're actually a customer there and you're not just there mooching for free parking. Finally, there are boondocking communities. These are rarely found, but they do exist. Some are sort of the type of like Slab City. If you look that up on YouTube, you'll see it's an interesting abandoned naval base down in Southern California. It's not too hospitable in the summer because it gets so hot and dusty, but there are thousands of people living there under no rules. You just sort of find a spot and park. Of course, there are self-enforced rules there, and so you don't want to go against the community in the wrong way. If you're nice and you're polite, you can put yourself into that community and find the right little corner of Slab City for you. Quartzsite's the same thing. Allows for boondocking in various ways, whether the paid long-term areas or the 14-day free areas. But in Quartzsite, Arizona, it's well known for being a community that allows for boondocking and almost encourages it. And you can even find within those boondocking areas small clusters and communities that might be a closer alignment to the type of community you're looking for. So take a look on YouTube for Quartzsite and Slab City. If for no other reason, it's quite interesting and entertaining. I'll be doing a series on boondocking over the next year, and whenever I find or know about some really good boondocking spots, I'm going to go ahead and document them and put up a short little video. The first one will be Hope Slide, BC, which is a great rest area with a gorgeous view, and you can generally park there without being approached by any law enforcement officer. It's a pretty laid-back place. Some aren't always as laid back as Hope Slide. So join me as I continue to talk about boondocking and continue to post videos of various places where you can boondock overnight or for a few days, depending on the location. And it's the way I like to travel. When I'm doing a trip coming up, I'm only putting maybe 1/3 of those days where I'm actually staying at an RV park. 2/3 of that time or more, I'll be boondocking either on people's properties or in BLM land or at rest areas. I've got a whole plan, and I'll be talking about that as well in a future video. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate it. It's this type of behavior of not looking rare, and you can generally park there on a proactive. The less you're going to see a proactive. Come on, Joe. Contact.